Hi all, and thank you so much for joining the community conversation today, community conversation number 16. My name is Jessie Kelly. I am the Partnerships and Knowledge Manager at the Anticipation Hub. And it's really great to have you all here to be able to get the chance to look at the Anticipatory Action 2023 Global Overview Report. The team has worked really hard on this, so without further ado, I will hand over to one of the co-authors, Tim Woods, our Manager, Outreach and Communications.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. This is the second overview report launch that we've done. We did one at Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week in Geneva. So this is the online launch, and thank you very much for joining us. Just to run you through what we're going to be talking about today. I will give an overview of what is in the report. You may well have had time to glance through it already, but this is just a kind of a quick summary going over the main findings, the main trends that we identified with the data. Then we're going to have two presentations from some of the Anticipation Hub's partners, and they're going to tell us what's actually happening in the world rather than just on the maps in the report. So it'll be some updates from one from the Sri Lanka Red Cross Society and one from the Danish Refugee Council. And then we're going to hand it over to the participants here and let you share your own thoughts about the findings in the report, what they mean, how you use the report or the information in it, something that might be missing or you think would be useful for future editions. So please do give us your feedback, give us your thoughts, whether good or bad. And yeah, there'll be plenty of time to do that in the breakout rooms. And then we'll finish the session just by coming back together and just sharing one or two highlights that the Anticipation Hub can take away to sort of consider for next year. So the report, this is the second one that we've done. The first one was, of course, looking back at 2022. And so this year we had the first opportunity to compare year-on-year data. Let me just check. Yeah. And so the first set of data that we collected, as last year, is the active frameworks that are in place around the world. Now, by an active framework, we mean an early action protocol in the Red Cross Red Crescent Society, an anticipatory action protocol in the UN system. So the FAO and the WFP, they use something called an anticipatory action protocol, but it sets out what the triggers are for the hazard, what the anticipatory actions will be, who will do what, and the amount of money that's available. And when you put all those bits of information onto a map, you can see where there are systems in place for anticipatory action around the world. And a quick look at this map shows there's quite a bit in Central America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then Asia Pacific and Central America, Central Asia as well. There's also, if you notice, the first active framework in Europe, which was for heat waves in Greece, which was interesting for us to see. And it gives us a sense of what's happening around the world and also the hazards. When we were collecting this information, as mentioned, we were looking at how the data had changed year on year. And it was, I'm not going to lie, it was a relief to see that numbers had gone up. It would have been quite a difficult report to write if the numbers were going down and we didn't have as many frameworks or not as many funding. So yeah, we were pleased to see that the system is developing, it is advancing and growing around the world. So this is the frameworks that are in place in 2023. There's 47 countries, a rise from 35. 107 frameworks, so some countries have more than one, of course, a rise from 70, and there's more people covered and more financing in place. I think the other interesting thing is when we crunch the data about the frameworks is drought is by far the hazard that has the most coverage. So that's in terms of the number of frameworks in place, that's in terms of the amount of people covered, and also in terms of the amount of financing that is put aside for acting ahead of drought. Now, I'm sure there are reasons for this. Some of the more educated people, more experienced people than me have told me some of these reasons, but that would be something that would be very interesting to hear from the community, is about why drought is not just a little way ahead of all the other hazards, but so far ahead. Is it drought is the biggest challenge we face? Is it that it's easier to act in anticipation of drought, or is there another reason? That would be interesting for us to know. So any thoughts there, please do share them in the breakout room. The second map, and this is probably where I think there's probably the most interest, perhaps more than the active frameworks, is the actual activations that took place during the year. This is not just what's written down on paper, what actually happened on the ground. And if you compare the two maps, you'll see that there are some countries here that didn't feature on the active frameworks. And that's because not every country and not every organization has a framework for anticipatory action. Some of it's based on local information, local triggers. Some of it's done in a slightly different way to how I first understood anticipatory action, of being written down and all planned in advance. So I imagine we've got people from those organizations who can talk us through that as well. But that would be something else perhaps for the breakout rooms, is to talk about, are frameworks still an essential part of anticipatory action? Do they still serve a purpose? Is it just different, as the approach expands, different organizations will use different approaches. Any thoughts there would also be welcome. But this gives us a coverage of what actually happened around the world in 2023. 98 activations, 12.8 million people reached. This is the amount of funding, lots of organizations involved. This actually went up a little bit more than it might have done normally, because this year we expanded the data collection process to our partners as well. So there were organizations out there who perhaps didn't have a chance in the first year's report to submit their data. We made sure that they had that opportunity this time. And I guess, again, one of the key headline figures is 48 countries saw an activation in 2023. Something else we did for the first time for 2023, which we didn't do in 2022, is we actually looked at what types of action are people implementing. And so because we didn't have a system from the first report to base this on, we came up with some categories of the different types of action. Because this is an overview report, we couldn't get down into the detail and the nuance of every single type of action that is happening. So we tried to categorize all the ones that were submitted by our partners for the report. And I guess the headline figures here are that cash and voucher was the most widely cited in the frameworks, which is the light blue columns, and also the most widely used. So there was 83 activations that used cash and voucher assistance. That pleased our cash and voucher team here, I think it's fair to say. But it's interesting to know if this is the most versatile or one of the most applicable forms of anticipatory action assistance. Second most was early warnings, and by that we don't mean the kind of the forecasts or the triggers. We mean the reaching out to community, sharing the message that people that a hazard is on its way, and now is the time to act. And then third was WASH, which I guess again is applicable across a great number of hazards. So yeah, and this is, as I said, this is the first year we've come up with this list. So do feel free to give us your feedback about the way that we categorized the different types of action around the world, and if you think it's too detailed, not detailed enough, anything like that, we will listen to your thoughts there. And finally, this is the third bit of information we collected in terms of looking around the world, and this is the frameworks that are under development. And this is useful because it gives us an indication of what's happening around the world. It's, again, a quick comparison of the three maps. This is the most densely colored in darker blue, which means that there are countries that are working on anticipatory action frameworks but haven't yet finalized them or haven't validated and approved. But it's useful. It gives us a sense of where things are happening and where things might change in the next few years. And as you can see, there's some countries here in North Africa that are working on their own frameworks. There's a bit more in South America as well. And there's also Germany. The German Red Cross is working on a framework here as well. And again, much like Real Madrid in the Champions League, it's very hard to beat drought. It's still, even in terms of the frameworks under development, that's the leading category of hazard. So that's where the most work is going on. And also something else that you see the little MH there, that is multi-hazards. There's quite an increasing number of multi-hazard frameworks where people aren't just looking at the one hazard, but looking at a complexity of hazards in a certain region and how they can anticipate all of those together. So that's section 2 of the report, and the rest of the report is more descriptive, and it looks at some of the trends and the thematic areas that took place in 2023. We did canvass the Anticipation Hub partners. We talked to the Anticipatory Action Task Force about this, and we can't cover everything. It's never possible, but these are the themes that were identified to us and based on our kind of attending the dialogue platforms and different events that seem to be the prominent themes that people were talking about in the year. There's a description of all these obviously in the report, but you can see them there. And I guess a question here for the breakout groups and for the participants gathered is, are these the ones that you would have picked? Did we miss anything major that was happening in the year that should have been covered? Is there something that you think should be covered in the future? But these are the ones that we went with last year. Government-led, I think, was there's a lot happening around the world with that. We had a couple of case studies in the report. Risk financing as well, looking at the diversity of ways to finance anticipatory action, the need for more financing comes up again and again. And that group or that section looks at the different sources of funding that might be coming available. Anticipating displacement, that was something that different organizations have looked at this year. There was a workshop last year that looked at how we can do that. So it's a non-climate or weather-related hazard. Anticipatory action can be applied ahead of other types of hazard as well. And we wanted to highlight that as something, not just displacement itself, but sort of looking ahead to, can this be applied to non-climate and weather-related hazards? Health, we've got a working paper actually coming out with our working group on that, and looking at how to act ahead of health-related crises. Locally led anticipatory action, again, there's a briefing about this, and also the new working group. That's something that came up a lot at our dialogue platforms last year, and a lot in the conversations that were held in and around the anticipation hub. So we felt that was a good theme to include this year. Multi-risk, that again is another new working group we have that is going to be looking at how you act ahead of multiple or complex hazards. And this last one is fragile and conflict affected settings. We did actually collect some data there as well about which frameworks could be applied in conflict affected settings. And this is something, again, which an awful lot of people are very interested in. And I believe one of our presentations coming up will touch on this as well. And section 4, this is the conclusions, the next steps, and this is something that we work very closely with the Anticipatory Action Task Force on to come up with, to make sure that we're all not speaking with one voice, but we're working together. We've all got the same ideas for what needs to happen next, because if this report is aimed at a policy and donor and government audience, then they want to have a united message, or sort of common themes that they can see as the things that they need to invest in and support us with. And those are the 5 that were identified as some of the major things that need to move forward in 2024 and beyond. And yet again, it would be great to know people's thoughts about that, whether they are the ones that are the most pertinent for the sector, and also how do we go from getting these in a report to happening on the ground? What needs to happen to turn these into actual next steps? Okay, and with that, I will conclude the presentation of the report. I hope it wasn't too rushed, but I want to give time for people to share their thoughts as well. And I will now hand over to Ganga from the Sri Lankan Red Cross Society, and she'll tell us a little bit about what's happening in Sri Lanka. I'll just bring up your presentation, Ganga, and then share the screen. Yeah. And there we go.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon from Sri Lanka. So I'm going to talk about the new EAPs we have developed so far, but we haven't submitted for validation. Can you please put the full screen mode? Yeah, thank you. So what is happening in Sri Lanka at the moment is hi, Tim, can you hear me?
We can hear you well, Ganga. You keep going.
Okay. What is happening in Sri Lanka at the moment is we started developing 3 EAPs. Can you please go to the next slide, please? Yeah, 3 EAPs actually in a right shop in end of November 2023 with the support of Asia Pacific Office, that is Raymond supported actually on dengue, floods and economic crisis. The dengue actually we worked it like because we got the support from the government National Dengue Control Unit, and now it's with the dengue control unit for validation because we wanted to go with the government government consent because they have all the details and the figures and the expertise. So so they will validate the report, and then soon after the validation, we with their comments we can submit for the validation committee. And the flood, actually we have a challenge for trigger development because now we actually work with the Department of Irrigation and Department of Meteorology. But now actually at the moment we are experiencing a major flood, and we are in the process of developing a draft. Now we learned actually with this developing of this appeal and also working with this new flood situation. Since Sri Lanka is a small country, it's an island country, and it's the trigger period lead time is around 2 to 6 hours. So it's very difficult to have a lead time. So with that, we learned that there should be a depression with the monsoon season, and also there should be when there's a El Nino effect. So the Sri Lanka gets a flood. That's with the historical data. So that with that experience and learning, we will develop the triggers, and then we will submit the flood EAP also soon. And economic crisis, actually we face a challenge in data and trigger development. So we are planning to work on that also. Next slide, please. So that is our learning, that is our work at the up to this stage. But we got we have a huge learning with the this development process because since this September last year, the Sri Lanka Red Cross Society has no awareness on the EAPs and the anticipatory action process. But now in September we learned what is it. The staff and the volunteers of the mainly staff of the Red Cross, what is anticipatory action, and with that we thought we will have a dialogue platform, and then with that is a turning point actually for the country also, because there were some small interventions in the country, but then this was a turning point for all the stakeholders about learning about anticipatory action. So with that platform, we established a technical working group. Sri Lanka Red Cross Society lead actually to develop the technical working group, and at the moment we are co-chairing with WFP, World Vision Lanka, and International Water Management Institute. So with the establishment of technical working group, we work on formulating the action plan, and now it's a high time to get the government on board. So we are in the discussion with the Ministry of and the Disaster Management Department of the Ministry of Defense to take the government on board. So because we learned that the development of EAP, because we are a bit delay in the development of EAPs, but then we learned that we have to go with the government. So it takes a bit of time to take the government on board and to work with them because the normal approach is the response approach after the disaster. But now actually with this current floods, we learned, actually the government also learned, I think they are in the process of learning that we need to prepare beforehand and to keep the stocks, and then do some anticipatory action work before the disaster to save more lives. So that I think now with this incidents and then with this learning, we can go ahead with the government very soon. So we are planning we have now from Sri Lanka, the 3 persons attended from World Vision, Red Cross, and WFP for a regional training, and now we have 3 trainers, and so we are planning to do the we are planning to conduct trainings for practitioners and government in July and August this year. And also we with some invitations, we did sessions for the university also about the anticipatory action. So with that we get the recognition and then the acceptance from the other stakeholders to share the learnings and to aware the stakeholders on the subject. And I think it's a good thing that we learn from the process, that people need to know where to work with this in the subject. So and also now in future we will go for a dialogue platform. It's a South Asia dialogue platform for the South Asian countries, and also a Sri Lanka dialogue platform in September. So because we thought that it's a good thing to learn from the other countries after attending the regional and global dialogue platforms, that it is a good opportunity to learn from others. So now we are working on that. So that's the learning process and what is happening in Sri Lanka at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ganga. And Alexander, I believe, is here, and he's going to talk to us about what the Danish Refugee Council is doing in Somalia. Let me just bring up that slide as well.
Sure. It's actually in South Sudan, but
South Sudan. Sorry, I do apologize.
Starts with an S and an O as well. Sure. And while it's loading, so I'm Alexander Kjærum, and I work as a senior analyst and global advisor in the Danish Refugee Council. I'm based in Ethiopia, so I quite often experience power cuts. So I hope I will be able to stay on for the duration of this presentation. Is it just me, or let's start seeing slides?
Wait, we're just a minute, Alexander.
Okay, yeah, sure. I can just start, and then they'll come. So
yeah,
basically, just also picking up on Tim's presentation of the overview report. I think one of the things I noticed was, of course, that there's not a lot of anticipatory frameworks related to displacement, in particular conflict displacement, and also not so many that are particularly focused on sort of protection per se. So that's really something we've been trying to focus our efforts around, as these two themes are really the core of our mandate. So in Akobo, which is on the border of Ethiopia in South Sudan, we've been looking at setting up this anticipatory action framework for conflict displacement. So basically, just to give you an introduction to the context, there are a number of different types of conflict in this area, but one of the areas, or one of the conflicts that in particularly is driving the displacement, is between two ethnic groups, the Lao Nur and the Murle, in this area. And typically what happens is that you have sort of the dry season starting around November, December, and lasting until May. And in this period, these two groups come into clashes, and it can lead to displacement. So typically what happens is that because of the lack of resources, land and water and so on for cattle, they move into each other's territories, which leads to abduction of the cattle and cattle raidings, as well as abduction of the women and children and so on. So we also saw here in April actually an increase in these type of incidents, which then angered youth from the Lao Nur, and which then crossed into the Murle areas, and there were some attacks here. And then on the way back, something new occurred, because then a new ethnic group called the Anuak, they also came into conflict with this group from the Lao Nur. So since then, in sort of May, there's been a bit of a lull, but basically now things is looking like the conflict is going to increase. So if we go to the next slide. So basically what we've set up over the past year, and why we're ready actually now to respond and just have triggered the action, is a combination of two things. One is that we have developed a model to predict displacement 3 to 4 months into the future at the subnational level, so down to the admin 2 level, or typically region or municipality level. We have this for South Sudan, but also for a number of other countries, including Somalia, but also Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We combine this with then community protection monitoring data that we collect. So together with the communities in Akobo, we defined sort of what are the typical signs and indicators that you see that conflict is increasing and that will potentially lead to displacement. So some of the things they've highlighted has been around when you see arrivals into Akobo from outside communities, so sort of preemptive displacement. Sorry, that's a typical sign. Also, when you start having movement restrictions and experiencing sort of feeling unsafe moving around, when children are being mobilized, sorry, and recruited by armed groups, and of course also reports of incidents of violence. So we've been monitoring these, and here a couple of weeks ago, our prediction model reached the trigger thresholds, and a number of these community protection indicators also reached the trigger thresholds. So we activated the mechanism. And if we go to the next slide, so what we are then implementing in terms of activities are in sort of 2 different areas. So in those communities on the outskirts of Akobo that are the ones experiencing where the displacement is likely to occur, we have initiated, first of all, some peace building dialogues and workshops between these different ethnic groups. All of them have sort of peace committees that are basically working to try to diffuse the tensions. But we are also working with these communities to provide a sort of protection awareness raising trainings. We're also providing trainings on sort of explosive ordnance, risk education, and so on. So essentially to prepare these communities that in case they have to flee, what are the safe routes, what are the risks, and also what are the rights, for example, when they arrive in Akobo. And then also doing some initial needs assessment, of course, and identifying the vulnerable households. The anticipatory actions we're then doing in the host communities is then to deploy technical staff that can then support people when they arrive, but also pre-positioning shelter kits and NFI kits so we can support their needs when the displaced people arrive, as well as update the service mapping and referral pathways as well. So everything is sort of updated and ready for an increase of arrivals in Akobo town, basically. Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, that's my last one. I'll wrap it up. So this is something we have this framework in place in South Sudan. We also have one in Burkina Faso for now, but something we are working to expand on at the moment. We're in the process of developing a similar framework in Somalia as well, and then as well in Myanmar, Ethiopia, Niger, and Uganda. We are working to develop these similar frameworks as well in the near, so over the coming one or 2 years. And of course, very happy to also collaborate with other partners here on the call that are interested in this topic. So I think I'll stop there, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you both very much. Very interesting. And I think now we can, unless there's any questions for our 2 presenters, if anyone would like to very quickly before we go into the breakout rooms, because I know Alexander's on a dodgy power supply. So if anyone's got any questions for the presenters, please just feel free to unmute and ask them. If not, we can move to the breakout rooms. Going once, going twice. Okay, if you come up with them, just put them in the chat and we'll make sure they get passed on. So Jesse, perhaps you could explain how the breakout rooms will work and allocate people.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. So we're going to have 3 breakout rooms that are around different sections of the report. So focusing on that highlight overview that Tim gave you. So we've got section 2 was about, as a reminder, was about anticipatory action in 2023. Section 3 is milestones in 2023. And section 4 is about trends, gaps, and the way forward. So the breakout rooms will be self-select. So I'll open them up now, and you're very welcome to pick your own room, join whichever conversation suits you best, and we will see you back here in approximately 20 minutes. Great. So thank you everyone for rejoining. And so we're now going to just get some feedback from those discussions. So I'd ask the 2 room facilitators, if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple of highlight points from the discussion with us. So in alphabetical order, I'll start with Anita, and then Shona, if you would like to jump in.
I, of course, had the best group and best discussions. No, I was very, very lucky. I landed with Sri Lanka and Global Cash, and so I had a really interesting chat. And I think from section 2, very data heavy, and lots of really interesting sort of bits and pieces that people picked up. Nobody had a chance to read it before today, so the presentation was useful and our discussion was useful. So Celine from CALP, she said actually she thought the map was really useful, where you can see which countries are working on AA, you know, the ones that already have frameworks, have already activated, or are actually currently developing frameworks, because it's not that necessarily cash working groups in the region that she works with know about it. In fact, they actively said there wasn't anything going on in the countries where there is something going on. So that's a really excellent sort of piece of information there in the report, really useful, and that will be definitely a topic for the new cash working group that we're setting up together, to make sure that the cash world, the huge cash world, really understands and knows what's going on, and to make those connections. So that was really, it's quite satisfying. Yeah, and then the other piece of feedback was how useful the El Nino information box was. You know, because in Sri Lanka's case, they don't have the forecast, and we, long story short, managed to make a connection where we realized that we could support each other with the forecasting around that for hopefully flood in Sri Lanka, using some of the networks and support that we have. The Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre, for example, the support that they can give on forecasting. So yeah, it was a really interesting, short and sweet session.
So I'll take over here. I will challenge Anita's claim that she's the first group. I think she needs to do her meal and have some evidence for that. So yeah, I also had a fantastic group. Thank you all for your comments. Yeah, so we first of all looked at whether the recommendations in the overview report reflected how we saw anticipatory action advancing in the coming years. Actually, there was a general feeling that the recommendations were the right ones. So that's great. And again, just as we've seen in the discussions in developing the concept note for the Global Dialogue platform, 2 key themes really came to the front here. And that is the focus around multiple and compounding hazards, and we need to focus on that and develop coordination around it. And also issues regarding integration and mainstreaming. So that was discussed both in terms of integration between the humanitarian sector and governments, and also development actors, but also integration and coordination along the disaster risk reduction to recovery continuum, and the need for actually investment in projects that are sufficiently financed and sufficiently large to support that coordination work, which often can't be supported with small amounts of funding in small pilot projects. We also looked at what would need to be done to turn these recommendations into actual change. And again, financing is a challenge for all the aspects. It was interesting because the first 3 of the 5 recommendations were really seen as quite interconnected. So whilst it's useful to expand them out, you know, looking at the financing question, looking at the meal question, and looking at the integration question, they are actually intrinsically linked. And so I think that is both an opportunity and a challenge. You know, if we scale up in some of these areas, it'll bring the others up, but also we need to be thinking about them all. And again, yeah, the challenge in bringing donors on board with this is, as ever, producing that high quality evidence in what is, you know, potentially even more complicated contexts. So yeah, that was some feedback from our group, sort of wrapped up in terms of the integration question, just sort of recognising the challenges that the governments face, and the fact that you know, even different departments in governments may not be joined up, and so it's our job to try and ensure that we're reaching these people and bringing them into our events, our conversations, and doing what we can to build their capacity to join up both with humanitarian actors and with one another. To deliver on this direction. So thank you. Back over to Jessie.
Well, look, thank you, Shona. So actually, I will hand to Tim again for the end of this conversation. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Jessie, and thank you to Shona and Anita as well. Yeah, just one very quick bit of feedback. There's been a lot of talk about multi-hazard frameworks, but I'm just worried that they're going to start playing havoc with my maps and my graphs, and they're going to get harder to produce. I'm going to lose all my nice little icons. So, you know, just bear that in mind before you develop your multi-hazard frameworks. Do think of the maps. But yeah, so just very quickly to wrap up, thank you very much to Ganga and to Alexander for presenting and sharing what they're doing on the ground. It's very interesting to hear. I'd also just like to take this opportunity to officially and formally thank everyone who contributed to the report. So that is the partners, the Anticipation partners, who all submitted their data and gave us feedback throughout the year on last year's, and sort of help us to keep on track of what everything's happening around the world. The Anticipatory Action Task Force, critical in kind of pulling it all together. They have the sort of the big picture overview, and they really steer the way that the report goes. The German Federal Foreign Office, of course, provides the funding for the hub, and therefore by default for the report. So we'd like to thank them as well, and also to my colleagues as well, not just for helping today, but for being a constant source of information and advice and support while we're pulling this report together. So yeah, thank you all very much, and we will take your feedback and we will revise the report for next year. We'll look at it all, and there will also be more opportunities to give your thoughts, certainly at the Global Dialogue Platform, which is happening in October this year, and also the regional and national level dialogue platform. So, you know, the report will be fed into as many of those as we can, so people can sort of say how they're using it, and, you know, what information they need going forwards as well. And I just close with a couple more announcements. The next community conversation is actually going to be on Thursday. We're going to be talking about cooling centres as an anticipatory action, whether how they can be used ahead of heat waves. And Thomas, who's on the call today, is going to be part of that. So please do come and join us there. The information and the link to register is on the Anticipation Hub website, and we look forward to seeing you there. The next partners meeting for Anticipation Hub partners will be on the 21st of June, and you'll be getting an email about that soon if you're a partner. And that was everything. So yeah, thank you very much once again for joining us today and for all your thoughts and inputs. And yeah, we will see you very soon at an Anticipation Hub event. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.